Welcome to The Insurgency with me, Steve Baker. It's the podcast which helps us all get beyond the mere gossip of Westminster to the factors which really shape all our lives. And welcome to Season 2. And I'm delighted in Season 2 that we are brought to you in association with GlintPay. It's the app and MasterCard which enables you to own, save, send and spend real physical gold. So if, like me, you believe in sound money as the cornerstone of a free society, go to glintpay.com, download the app and get started today. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome my co-host Albie Amankona, standing in for Harry Richer. Albie, it's brilliant to have you here. Why don't you tell us who we've got today?
Great to be here, Steve. Well, we've got a fantastic guest for you on today's podcast. We have the Conservative Shadow Business and Trade Secretary, Andrew Griffiths. He's also the MP for Arundel and the South Downs. But before he was elected as a politician in 2019, he led a very illustrious career in finance and media. He started as a financial analyst at Sky and then rose to positions of Chief Financial Officer and also Chief Operating Officer. Andrew is an ideological free market conservative, and it's wonderful to be joined by him today.
Albie, thanks very much. Andrew, welcome.
Oh, it's great to be here.
I'm so happy that you're here. And when I reread your CV, I was once again terrifically impressed because, of course, everybody thinks that we politicians are all the same, never done anything but politics. What's it actually like to be the Chief Operating Officer and CFO of Sky?
It's pretty challenging in a different way. You're a bit like politics. It is quite 24/7. You know, you're on risk for dealing with cyber. If feed goes down, a satellite breaks. So it's always on. I mean, most businesses, I think, these days are like that. And like the organisation of politics, you're dealing with people. So, you know, you're trying to, in that case, get people aligned, get them to do their best work, create environments in which they can do that. And I loved it. I mean, I have to say, I lived a delightful life in business. It was 20 years. I don't think we had a single down year. We were kept on our toes by customers. Every single customer we had was contracting voluntarily with us. Although it was a really big business, it was one of the biggest businesses in the FTSE by the end of it. All of those customers had a choice, and they'd all used that choice. We weren't a former privatised monopoly or a state business. I don't think we ever really got a pound of money from the state. But it was a great innings, and I was very lucky.
Just try and help people understand what that really means. What kind of scale of budgets were you dealing with? What was the turnover of Sky?
I think by the end it was, over £13 billion a year. We had 13 million customers. Those are individual households who, in those days were taking their dish. These days it would have been about streaming. Then we were delivering their broadband, operating in 7 different markets. So not just a UK business, but a business that operated across lots of different European markets. And of course, very competitive.
Yeah.
Every single day you woke up in the morning and there was always both a high degree of technology change, but also someone who quite understandably would have tried to take your customers and deliver a better service for them.
So as MPs and ministers, we get very used to talking in terms of billions. But there's not very many people in Parliament, I would have thought, who've dealt in billions in the private sector, are there?
No, I suspect not. I mean, we were one of the larger companies, and look, that's I was at one end of the business spectrum. So the same things that every small business has to cope with, you have to cope with in business. So you are at the end of the day, you're making judgment calls on people, you're taking a risk, you're trying to make a project work, you're trying to make the numbers add up. You don't know when you go into something whether it's making a new TV show, buying some sports that may or may not work, building a new factory, going into a new market. These are exercises in risk taking, in trying to mitigate that risk, calculate the probabilities, but at the end of the day, you've got to have a belief that you can go and compete and succeed on that basis. And if you don't, it's super accountable.
Yeah,
there is nowhere to hide, particularly if you're a listed company.
Yeah.
But again, I always think when I think about businesses, the ones I'm really thinking about are the small ones, the ones on Midhurst High Street, on High Wycombe High Street, because they're dealing with all those same things, but they don't always have the same level of resilience and overhead, particularly when it comes to governments, taking actions against them. They don't have a lot of lawyers and HR people and all that sort of infrastructure.
We'll come to that.
Just to ask you a question with your 2 hats on. Obviously, you're a former Sky executive. You're now the Shadow Business Secretary. We've heard that there might be some consolidation between Sky and ITV. What are your thoughts on that? Is that a good thing for British consumers and content creators, or a bad thing in your opinion?
It's a good thing, net. I was always hugely frustrated, and I've written about this, by the propensity of competition regulators. It's a vice of regulators in general, to make judgments that precluded the operation of markets. And one of the challenges of the UK, people often say, well, look, hang on, you guys pretty much invented TV, for example. Why do you not have a Netflix? You guys were early in the days of computing. Why do you not have a Google? And one of the reasons is that the regulators have these complicated, rather dry economic theories of harm, whilst everyone else is just getting on, getting bigger, getting the scale to compete globally. We're trying to micro-regulate things. So you look at ITV. I mean, why is that one of the only domestic television businesses? Why might it end up as part of NBC, Comcast, or ABC, or Disney, or something? It's partly because the state, the regulators, have preferred to keep their sort of playthings local and small rather than allow them to consolidate. And in many technology-driven industries, you actually need more than just a nation-state level of scale to be able to compete successfully.
And if you were the business secretary, what 3 things would you do to ensure that if the next great invention, whether or not it's Tim Berners-Lee's internet, but he's inventing it tomorrow, or indeed the television, what would you do differently that would allow Britain to have a Netflix in the future, or Britain to have an Apple in the future, or Europe to have an Nvidia in the future?
Look, I think three things is probably more than you need. I mean, ultimately, we may get into this, there are simply too many people, by and large, associated with or paid for by the state, who are empowered to say no, and are not particularly incentivized or motivated to say yes if saying yes involves some sort of risk, a risk of being criticised, a risk of politicians piling in and saying you've not done your job well. So I think that's our issue. We're as productive now as we've ever been. We're as ingenious, we're as innovative. We spawn as many new companies and products as anywhere in the world, and as much as we ever have in our history as the cradle of the first industrial revolution. I think people would tell you the issue now is about scale, and there's businesses, largely in the US, but not exclusively, that scale really quickly. They gobble up capital, they gobble in resources, they're able to hire their most talented people, and they can scale to a level that's just really, really hard in the UK, because you're still, queuing outside the local council town hall to get your permit to, recycle your bottles or something, while someone else is raising their first billion and shooting for the moon.
So I think anyone listening to this will spot your expertise, your authenticity, your real experience in all these matters. I think, like me, they're going to wonder, why do you do it? Why have you gone into politics?
Look, that's a really good question. I mean, I'm a patriot. I'm hugely optimistic about this country. I think our latent level of innovation, some of the things that we've got that really no other country has on earth, the depth of our culture, our heritage, our mastery of the English language, the natural creativity that is spawned by the intersection, particularly in here, our capital city, the single place-based intersection between finance, creativity, architecture, academia. It's very rare to find that. In many other, bigger states, you'll find an individual city that specialises in one of those things. We've got that wonderful crucible. So I'm optimistic about our country, but I do disagree profoundly with the direction under this government. And, if we're being, as I have to be honest, I was motivated to come in because I saw what was going on to the party I've always been a member of under Theresa May, and I was tearing out my hair. And if you're watching this, you'll see it's nearly all gone, and there wasn't an awful lot there to start with. But I just felt we were being badly led, to be honest, and a lot of that is about the individual, but also it's about the way in which we are led. And so it may be a little bit naive, it may be utopian. I'm very, very proud to represent the seat where I and my family live, and that's a great source of solace on a difficult journey, is that I'm very proud of what I'm able to do for my constituents in the South Downs. But on a national level, I just want to help. I really just want to help unleash this country's great potential.
And
we've been through periods. Sorry, my final point was, look, my sort of formative experiences. I'm 54 now. I just about caught the tail end of the 70s and 80s. I was a child of the 70s, but grew up in the 80s, and there is something that I and others of that era have been yearning for, which is you can reinvent yourself. You can take a country that looks a bit down at heel, that's falling behind its peers, doesn't seem to have the pride in itself, and you can reboot it. It's not easy, but you can, and I would love to be part of that. No personal aggrandizement,
I think
but I'd love to be part of that revolution.
This is a really good point to come to Albie on the need for revolution for people of his generation, because we were both born in the same year, 1971, and of course
what a vintage year.
What a year.
The year of the first semiconductor. It has transformed humanity.
And
hugely.
Margaret Thatcher, of course, completely transformed the prospects of our nation. I mean, when we were 8 years of age, winter of discontent, it was a disaster. First female prime minister came to power and completely turned around our nation. Do we need to turn around the nation for your generation, Albie?
We do need to turn around the nation for our generation. But I suppose the core of my next question is about why the Conservatives didn't seem to manage to turn around the nation in that way. I think the first time I ever saw you, and this is an old YouTube video, was a video of you on Question Time, I think around the time Tony Blair was in power. And I was listening to an interview of Lord Billamoria of Cobra Beer, formerly of the CBI, I think on Times Radio. And he said the most business-friendly government during his time in business was the Blair government. He cited various taxes being lower, such as the higher rate of income tax, for example. Why is it that one of our best businessmen in the country is saying conditions for business were better under Tony Blair than they were under Cameron, than they were under May, than they were under Truss, Johnson or Sunak?
Look, there's a big question. I'm not sure I can do that full justice to it. But it seemed to me that the key thing about Tony Blair on the economic side is that he'd actually absorbed the lessons of Thatcherism, whereas Cameron and those that came after were more conditioned by Blair. And I think that's quite a key difference. And I'm not sure I fundamentally disagree with that from a business perspective. I think business, is not always been well served by many governments. I'm not uniquely, but I'm very proud of business. I'm always happy to defend wealth creators. One of the things that animates me the most, and not every politician will talk about it, is how people who are called non-dom for tax status, but they do pay significant amounts of tax here in many, many ways, are leaving our country. Now that to me is an unequivocally bad thing. If I talked about all of that potential we want to unleash, I don't find that difficult topics to talk about, but there have certainly been periods when the Conservative Party has not been as comfortable in defending wealth creators and business and enterprise. My hero politically was Lord David Young. Young came like me from a business background. He served as enterprise secretary in Thatcher's government. He did, I think, more to spawn a new generation of entrepreneurs. And one of the missions that I would hopefully take into government is creating a new generation of young people. It's really, really hard. In many ways, it's never been easier. Technology is wonderful. On our phones, we can connect with the entire globe. It's easy to find new markets. It's easy to create supply chains. It's easy to find your audience. The things that the government's responsible for that are really, really hard is blooming hard to rent premises. It's very hard to open a bank account. You have to sort of, you're guilty until proven innocent. And so some of and certainly very hard to hire people now under the government's new legislation.
We'll get on to that, but I'm also conscious of business rates. If you need premises, it's a really dreadful cost, isn't it? But
it's a horrible cost, and it's uncertain, and it's a cost that you incur before you've made a pound of profit, right?
I know an Indian restaurant on my local high street that's been open since 1970 has actually recently just closed because of the awful tax rises, business rates being one of them, that this Labour government is putting on people. But you were quite young in this video on Question Time, and youth, I think, is an important point. You mentioned creating a new generation of young people. Why should a centre-right thinking 16, 17, 18-year-old, or even 21-year-old, why should they vote or join the Conservative Party instead of the Reform Party in 2026?
Well, look, my menu answer to that would be, look, first of all, you've got a bifurcation between the state, socialist philosophy that they know best, that they determine your life. They make choices about where you can live, the sort of work you can do, and I reject that. I don't think that's the right way. We've just seen what's happened in Venezuela. I do not think that is the right way to build an uplifting future. The heady, intoxicating drug of freedom is something that I think young people, if we can articulate in the right way, is what they would aspire to. And actually, when you unpick it, you can have all sorts of conversations with young people, but when you unpick it, their desires are relatively conventional. They want security, to find love, to find somewhere secure to stay, to build a career, to own more of the fruits of their own products and skills and talents. So there's no change there. As it relates, and obviously I think that's not on the socialist side of things. So for that, you need the state to get out the way by and large, rather than to interfere ever more in your personal life, your social life, your economic life. There's no personal liberty without economic liberty. In terms of as between a changed Conservative Party and reform, look, I don't go around criticising anybody. I relish the fact, actually, that politics is a contestable domain. I mean, that is how we get the best ideas, the best people, the best solutions to things in society. I would just say, and you don't have to make a decision today because there isn't an election, but keep an open mind as to what a changed Conservative Party looks like. Because I think we've got, at our best, we've got the bench strength. We've got people who've got deep experience in domains, whether it's from the armed forces, whether it's from business, that we can put to use in serving the best interests of our country. And ultimately, you can behave like a team. One of the great, I was only in government, I was only a member of parliament in 2019. I still think I'm a newbie. In most other professional domains, you would be a newbie after 5 or 6 years. Actually, because of the turnover of politics, that's not the case. I'm probably one of the people who've been there a little bit longer, certainly on the opposition benches. But ultimately, if you want to change this country, so if you want to actually deliver as opposed to just articulate what the problem statement is, then you've got to find a team to back.
Andrew, imagine I am 17, I'm in a sixth form, you're in front of an audience of sixth formers. They are all watching Nigel Farage on TikTok, think he's pretty cool, actually. What are you saying to them to make them think, actually, me and my team that I'm part of, led by Kemi Badenoch, with me, Andrew Griffiths, as Shadow Business Secretary, we're worth listening to?
Look, I think a couple of things. First, if you're 17, what is your most likely preoccupation right now? It's getting your independence through a licence to drive. Right now, no beef with the state insisting upon a level of accreditation before you can drive, but the administration of that is an absolute shocking disaster. Now, that is fixable. When I and a number of other people in Number 10 saw the same sort of fiasco about passport renewals, we put a SWAT team on it, we set clear goals, accountabilities, and we fixed that. Now, that is just the boring competence of government, but believe me, if you're 17 and particularly if you're in a rural area, that is your lifeline.
Well, it was a big deal in Wickham as well, because people have ended up with fraud going on with bookings of tests and so on.
It's a horror show. So you want, even if you're 17 and you're not going to get too much into the machinery of government, you want the government, when it insists on things, to deliver for you. But the second thing, you want economic freedom. There is only one path to economic freedom. We're currently on a path where the state will take more and more from you. It will deny you opportunities. It will then replace some of those opportunities for real work, for example, that they've denied, with false work, with ersatz work, where you're working for the state. You're on a paid-for state scheme simply to keep you off the unemployment rolls. That's not what people want. And by the way, if you talk to people at 17, they're more militant about DEI, ESG than anybody, because they've been on the butt end of it. All right, they've been the ones that haven't necessarily had a Saturday job because of employment regulations. They're the ones that every time they try and apply for a job, there's one page of what are your own attributes, and then there's 3 pages of diversity and ethnicity and all the other sort of criteria. So they've actually been at the whip end of some of these things. And as I say, if you can put together a proper appeal of what true freedom looks like, bearing in mind people have been gaslit into not having that true freedom, then I think we've got a very strong message to sell.
Now, you mentioned security, people wanting security, and what could be more important to people than, as you said, somewhere to stay, the security of a home? What do you think about the housing market? Because I found when I first began in politics, you could talk in the abstract about freedom, but now I find when I talk to younger audiences, maybe people in their 20s actually now in work, they're not really listening until you've talked about housing. So what would you say to people about where we are with housing?
We're not going to do it justice in this call, but the key thing is the housing market, which I agree. I mean, it's not a market, first of all, right? I mean, there's been intervention after intervention by the state heaped on. So it's like a teenager's carpet, right? You can't see what the underlying pattern is because there's so many different things have been piled on top. And the only way that we're going to fulfill anybody's ambitions in housing, and it relates as much to people who are trying to downsize as it does people who are trying to desperately get their first step on the housing ladder, is if we actually pare back a lot of that state intervention. Now, that's quite counterintuitive to lots of people. A lot of people, anyway, Steve, you would know, the life of an MP is people effectively petitioning you, could you not just wave your magic wand, Mr. or Mrs. MP, and add one more state regulation that will somehow solve the problem?
Or wave your magic wand and stop the housing from being built.
Yeah, oh, indeed, yeah.
I mean, that's just one of, the Plan 1948 Town and Country Planning Act is just one of many, many interventions. There are building regulations, there are environmental regulations.
But you've hit the nail on the head there, Andrew.
New home standards. There are multiple levels. I mean, like, devolution would be a great thing, right? If anyone ever tried it. No one's ever done it, as far as I can see. All they've done is piled more and more layers. So you've now in London, which is where this issue, the absolute apex of this housing issue is in London, which is just essentially not building. We've added extra layers of government on, and with all of them, whatever their political complexion, sticking their oar in, nothing at all gets through.
I want to say that the Emperor has no clothes, because you've just hit the nail on the head. We have a state land use planning system in this country, don't we? I mean, the use of land.
And it's worse than that, Steve. We could go on. I say it's a big topic. I mean, we ration capital. Right, so there's all sorts of Bank of England rules and regulations, both hard and soft, that restrict people's access to finance, their mortgage. You can't really take a bet on yourself. You're all very circumscribed in the sense of the amount that you can borrow, regardless of what you think your career trajectory and others would be. There's all sorts of risks. I mean, it's hard just to get, appointed a lawyer. So there's all sorts of transaction and friction costs. Stamp duty, which the Conservative Party, I'm very, very pleased to say, has promised to scrap. Stamp duty is a really big friction. I mean, it's a bad tax. There are many bad taxes, but stamp duty was a particularly iniquitous
What's bad
and
about
bad.
stamp duty?
Well, it's a friction. So it taxes a transaction that we want to happen. If you want a market to be vibrant, you want what clever people call liquidity. So you want that market to be able to turn over. You don't want people to be trapped by trying to do things.
And that's the point, isn't it? Is that if they face stamp duty, they're less likely to downsize.
They're less likely to downsize, or when you're just starting out and you're scraping, as I did. I mean, the things I did, you probably can't do now. I mean, you sort of, I don't think I'll get into trouble, but when I took out my first mortgage, you maxed out what you could get. By the way, it was 9.5% interest rate. So, interest rates are one component, but, it's not just that. And you were probably going and borrowing on a couple of credit cards to scrape together the deposit on top. Even some of those things now are pretty restrictive.
Now, we can't go any further without talking about the unemployment bill, because people aren't going anywhere without a job, and a good job at that. You have been one of the absolutely leading campaigners to point out what's wrong with the government's plans on employment rights. What are the top lines?
It'll stop hiring. I mean, hiring is an exercise. This is the most important insight. When you hire somebody, that is an exercise in taking a risk. Steve, you've got a great CV, and I've seen your CV, and we might have a chat for half an hour or 60 minutes in an interview. But at that point, let's be really honest, we don't know that much about each other. So I'm taking a risk on you if I, as an employer, and I've employed many thousands of people over my career. Now, most human beings are good and want to do the right thing, and most employers want to do the right thing. But if the state seeks to intervene to the degree of a 330-page Right, imagine that, 330 pages of closely typed regulations into that relationship of risk when you are hiring somebody.
Yeah.
And then you double down the sanctions by, for example, saying on day one, so if that element of taking a risk on you doesn't work, you can turn up in the morning, we're now already in mid-afternoon, you could go down and file a claim at the employment tribunal. Right, point one, those are things called day one rights. They sound nice, but like so many things that politicians say, they have really deleterious unintended consequences. And then the government has doubled down by removing any caps on the amount of compensation you can get. So it becomes almost rational, if you're not sure that things are working out, for you to go and file an employment tribunal claim. Now, again, bad for big businesses. They'll have to employ more HR people. The employment lawyers are the one growth area, as far as I can see, under this economy, because they're scaring, understandably, the willies out of bosses by saying, look at all this extra regulation that is coming. But where it really hurts is that small business that's maybe hiring a dozen people. If you've got a dozen people and one of them is taking you to an employment tribunal with no limit on what those damages could be, and with a backlog of over 2 years before that claim will be heard.
Yeah, what does it mean for your position?
That's pretty paralysing for a pub, a corner shop, a restaurant, apart from all the emotional drain. So at its heart...
Oh, and that's what people forget, isn't it? It's an emotional drain as well. If you're an employee, you've got enough worries as a small business person, and then on top of it, you've got to worry about that.
Well, hugely.
Yeah. And then the young person's not going to get the job.
Well,
right? That 17, 18-year-old,
I want to come to the 17-year-old quickly, because if I want you to explain to us and our listeners and viewers why the minimum wage being different for young people and people who are over a certain age is so important to business or isn't so important to business. Because that might be something that was difficult for people to swallow. I know when I was younger and I was earning less than people that were doing exactly the same job as me, that irritated me a bit. But now I understand why that was important. Why is it important?
Well, in essence, it gives you a chance to back yourself. Right? I mean, no one is forced in this society. No one is forced to take a particular job. We're lucky in the sort of society we have. But the opportunity to sell your services to an employer when you're young and you're hungry for experience, the experience of work. People talk about this sort of soft skill of being work ready. Well, there's nothing actually quite like being work ready as getting your first feet behind the desk, your first chance on the shop floor. As my first job was, baking donuts in Tesco's in-store, cafeteria. I mean, that's a classic first job. It taught me, the importance of rocking up, of having the right attitude, of being willing to learn things.
But why should the minimum wage be lower for a 16-year-old than a 25-year-old?
Well, because you are backing yourself to acquire those skills, right? The inflection of time will anyway see that wage increase. But you'd rather at that point get your foot in the door, have that opportunity to start your career, to start your adult life, than be simply locked out that market.
So in a sense, lowering the barrier to getting them in.
Lowering the barrier and getting people the thing that's much more valuable. I mean, this is advice I would give to anybody, any young person anyway, which is when you are young, it is much more valuable to be just getting experience. Now, I'm glad we don't have like big unpaid internships and things. That's important. But experience is what you're hungry for, and the money can come later. You never in life chase the money. That will come if you're successful. So that was always the argument for a lower starting wage for younger people. And the issue, when the state sets the price of anything, whether it's energy, whether it's oil, whether it's the price of money, the state won't get that right for every individual circumstances. Much better to allow the expressed will of the market to make those decisions in a much more unemotional way than for somebody in Whitehall to just one day wake up and decide, because they haven't got something to put in a speech tomorrow and it's Sunday afternoon, and we all done this in politics, oh my gosh, what are we going to say tomorrow? Oh, I know. Let's pluck this idea off the shelf and let's just announce it without going through a full evaluation of the consequences. Now, that is not, none of this should be about advocating exploitive behaviour. But if the flip side is that we have, as we do now, 1 million young people, most of whom would like to be in work, getting experience of work, but they can't, and there are horror stories. I've met young people who said, look, I stopped counting at 150 job applications, right? And some of these people, they've done all the right things. They've done what the state asked them. They've gone and get good grades. They've been diligent at university. They may have gone to college or even got an apprenticeship, and they can't get the work that they want. That's going to pretty, bugger up your life for a long time. And there's a lot of scarring if you don't get into the workforce when you're young.
So I just want to drill into one, I think, last question. In business, if somebody doesn't want to play ball, they can be fired. They can go and get a job somewhere else. But in politics, as Kemi pointed out once at a dinner where I listened to her, if she fires somebody, they stay in the House of Commons being a nuisance, trying to get rid of the leader. How does you've been a very, very senior guy. You said earlier that you've hired thousands of people over your career. As somebody with a real track record over decades of leading people, how do you cope with that categorically different phenomenon that members of Parliament aren't going anywhere once you sack them?
Look, there are lots of different things about the domain. And at the end of the day, you deliver results through a team. That is true in business. You may have responsibility for tens of thousands of people, but at the end of the day, you're exercising that through your team of 5 or 6 or a dozen, line managers, and they then in turn are doing the same. So a lot of it is keeping people aligned, keeping people focused on the prize rather than just looking inwards. There's obviously a bit about having the right people with the right sort of behaviours to start off with, but it is an exercise in leadership. The wonderful thing about politics is it's a diverse environment. There's lots of different ways to be an MP. There's lots of different ways to channel your energy into productive uses. Some people decide it's all about the constituency. Some want to or are willing to serve in shadow ministerial offices. Others will hold the government to account through select committees. So I don't think you can neglect the sort of man management aspect of it. Right? You've got a lot of people who are very sort of alpha type people. And quite rightly, you want to keep them busy. You want to give them respect. They're people who deserve respect, who put themselves in the public eye. It's not difficult.
They're there to get influence. You either give it to them or they'll take it for themselves.
Well said. Well said you. But it's a thing, and you've got to do it. You can't take it for granted. And number 10s of all flavours, I think, observe historically, can get a bit bunkered. And surround themselves with not the right people and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. So I think the Conservative Party is back. I mean, I really do want to give you positive confidence. I don't think people should give any political party a blank check, but I think we are on a rising trajectory. We are once again united in a way that I cannot remember in my adult life. We're starting to talk about things that matter. We are clarifying real detailed policy. Right? We've promised to remove all ESG regulation. Right? I mean, that's huge. Right?
Yeah.
Had we done that in government, that must have been worth a number of seats in itself. We're going to allow you to choose the car that you want. Right? There's a message to your 17-year-old. You're not going to go to the dealer and be told you can't have this particular sort of car. You can choose the car that's right for you. We're going to fix the housing market. We're going to control our borders so that you're not behind at the back of a queue that only ever grows every single day.
Are you getting a different response on the doorstep, or is the Conservatives being back a Westminster bubble story?
It's a bit of both, I'm being honest. I mean, it's, that's my pitch to you, which is we are back, we're credible, we're serious. That's the sort of conversations I'm having with businesses who really do want us to be back. They saw what we were able to do on the family business, family farm death tax, where we did get a U-turn. We extracted, not enough, but we extracted some improvements in the unemployment bill. So they want that voice, and they want that voice to be us because they see us as being particularly credible. And I think for the electorate, who very sensibly do not obsess about politics between elections, if we carry on this trajectory and we don't inflict upon them leadership changes and psychodramas, and they can remember what we stand for, which is the real problem I had on the doorstep at the last election. People would say, well, look, Andrew, I like you, and you work hard and you're diligent, but I don't know what your party stand for anymore. I've voted Conservative all my life, and I don't know what you stand for anymore.
Sounds familiar. So, Albie, thank you very much indeed for stepping in as co-host today. It's been an absolute joy to have you in. but more than that, I'm sorry, Albie,
No,
more than that,
absolutely.
what a joy to listen to you, Andrew. I mean, serious and credible, you said earlier, and you are, not only are you serious and credible, you're also fighting for a free future. So thank you very much indeed for what you're doing. I really hope sea-level people listen to one of their own and decide to step up and join in your sense of mission.
Yeah,
to
and small
turn this
businesses.
country-
And small
Well, yeah.
businesses, not just the big
Well, that's very true.
C-level people in the corner office. We need ordinary entrepreneurs, founders, even people that haven't been successful but have tried.
You're absolutely right to correct me. Andrew, thank you very much indeed for coming on. This has been The Insurgency with me, Steve Baker. I'm extremely grateful to Andrew Griffith for coming on. He is very, very practically and ferociously and rightly fighting for a free future. And you can join us in doing that by liking this video, by subscribing and by sharing. The Insurgency was brought to you today by Glint, the app and MasterCard which enables you to own, to save, to send and to spend real physical gold just about everywhere that MasterCard is accepted. So please go to glintpay.com, have a look at the website, download the app and get started today. But above all, keep on fighting for a free future.